we're going to hear from Gabe Dean now. He's going to talk about before and after effects of porn and how it was for him.
The holiday season just passed, and I spent Christmas with my parents. And after eating to the point where I could barely breathe, and I could still kind of talk a little bit, we sat down and chatted it up. And they asked me some questions about, they knew I was going to come talk here, so they were asking me questions about what I planned on talking about. And one of the things I told them I'd talk about is just the reality of porn's changed. And it's no longer, you know, magazines or popping in a VHS tape or even waiting to download a video clip. But today, we can watch an unlimited supply of hardcore porn, and you can watch it whenever you want, whatever you want. There's always something more shocking to escalate to. Internet porn is not the porn of the past, and it's essential that everyone understands that. And I grew up in this new world with internet porn. I was raised with a loving family and a great support system. I never was abused. I didn't have any traumatic experience happen to me as a kid. There's no history of addiction in my family. I was just a young kid that loved life and loved playing basketball and smacking my friends in video games. But around the age of 8, I was walking around my neighborhood and I found a Playboy magazine. And immediately I was, you know, captivated by sex. I wasn't too dumb of a kid, although it's debatable, but I knew what masturbation was, and I began jacking into pictures then at the age of 8. And that continued for about 2 years. When I was 10 years old, my family got cable TV, and that meant I could now watch MTV and BET booty shaking videos. And I could also watch late night HBO softcore porn. And there was some real creepy Sunday night sex show with some old lady that always talked about creepy sex positions. And as a 10-year-old, I thought that was awesome. And I would be watching TV in my room, and my parents would come in, you know, "Gabe, are you going to sleep?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to sleep." And as soon as they left, I was up watching porn until 3 or 4 in the morning as a 10, 11-year-old. Then, the big game changer happened. When I was about 12 years old, my parents got high-speed internet. My family got high-speed internet. And this is when things got bad real quick. Immediately, I was watching hardcore porn. Kids at school were talking about it. You know, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It was just normal. We would pass pieces of paper around with websites of where we could get free porn and give each other tips on how to hide it from our parents, you know, clear the history and all that stuff. And I wasn't the brightest, but I had some, you know, computer friends that knew exactly what to do, so I got all the good tips. I would race home from school like I was Lance Armstrong because I had about 4 hours to watch as much porn as I wanted until my parents got home from work. So I had unlimited access to all the kind of porn you could think of. By the time I was out of 8th grade, as a 14-year-old, I had already seen just about everything there was on the internet to watch, you know, regarding porn. Pretty much every genre you could think of. I also became sexually active in 8th grade. So, you know, I wasn't just a little, like, lock myself in the basement and fap all day and night kind of kid. I was actually, you know, real outgoing, real popular. I played basketball. Things continued going into high school. Actually, at the high school that I went to, I'm from Dallas, Texas, grew up right outside of Dallas in Irving. Irving High School was one of the first high schools where all the kids were issued their own laptops. And one of the first things all the guys tried to do, you know, was get around the block so we could play video games. The second thing was figure out how we could watch porn. So you had the scenario of me and all my friends at school watching porn in class while the teacher's teaching up front. And things continued all through high school, and the porn just got worse and worse. I know you'll hear guys talk about it, but what I started watching was stuff that I wasn't even really into originally. I started just clicking on stuff just for the shock value. It got so bad going into college that I really wasn't even watching sex anymore. I was just watching crazy crap just to get off to it. And you know, after I was done with my little session, I was, what the heck did I just watch? Like, am I really jacked up or what? And so just to explain to y'all, like, it got so dark that I was really it felt like I was an addict, like I was just getting a hit. I wasn't watching something that I wanted to, I was just watching something that gave me that rush. And going into college, I began to notice that my drive for life, my motivation began to drop. You know, I didn't want to grow up and be successful. I didn't care about getting married like I always used to when I was a kid. Didn't care about having a family or getting a good job and just, being successful. That all kind of faded away, but that didn't catch my attention. Something else caught my attention. Around the age of 22, I began to notice that it was getting harder and harder to get turned on by girls in real life. Ultimately leading to a time when I was 23, I was with a sexy girl who I thought was super attractive, prettier than porn stars, and we went to have sex and nothing happened. I couldn't even get the slightest bit of an erection, nothing. No matter what we tried, nothing worked. And I knew I wasn't nervous because I had lots of sexual experience. I knew I was attracted to her because she was a dime piece. And I knew it wasn't alcohol because I hadn't drank it. I had no idea what was wrong with me. So I did what anyone would do. I ran home and got on Google. And I typed in like young guy boner problem. And what else would you Google, right? I remember my mind being blown. I found forums where thousands of guys my age, thousands of teenagers, and all the way up to 60, 70-year-old, all these guys were saying they had the same problem. They couldn't get turned on by their partners who they did find attractive, and they were confused. So I'm reading their stories, and one thing was the same in all their stories: years of porn use. It still didn't make any sense to me, though. I was like, no, that can't be the problem. Porn cannot be the problem, right? And then, by a miracle, I came across one of Gary's comments that said to do the porn-induced ED test, right? So I'm like, what is this? Step 1, see if you can get hard porn. Okay, check. I knew I could do that. Step 2, see if you can masturbate without porn. And I was like, that's impossible, no way. So I ran to the bathroom, I tried it, and I couldn't get turned on at all. And it said not to use fantasy, but I was like, screw it, no guy doesn't use fantasy, right? Why would you do that? So I tried fantasizing, I'm sitting there trying to get hard, not to be too graphic, and I couldn't. I was in the bathroom all by myself, nice and relaxed, and I couldn't even masturbate without pornography. So it hit me like a ton of bricks. I broke down and was crying. I couldn't believe that porn had caused my ED, which, by the way, you can't have performance anxiety with your own hand, because it's not, worried if you're going to please it or not. So I knew it wasn't performance anxiety. It was internet porn. And so as I was reading, I saw that guys typically recover in, 6 to 8 weeks. And I thought, no big deal. I'm going to go no porn, and I'll be good to go in 6 weeks. 3 months rolls around, and still no libido, no sex drive. I still wasn't recovered, so I started freaking out. By this time, withdrawal had hit me about a couple weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks after I gave up porn. My anxiety shot through the roof. I'd be at work one time, I had an anxiety attack. I worked at an industrial supply company, and one time I was in the factory counting nuts and bolts. And when your anxiety's up, you're thinking all these crazy thoughts. I was counting nuts and bolts, thinking about that my nuts and bolts didn't work. And I just remember I just got so mad, I ran outside, I started kicking boxes and just broke down crying. And my insomnia got real bad. I couldn't sleep at night. I was laying in bed, just the heart rate was just like I just got done running a marathon, and I was just trying to go to sleep. And this is not my personality at all. I'm usually a pretty laid back guy. So the withdrawal of giving up porn for me was very real. Continuing through my recovery story, it took me 6 months. 6 months, no porn, no masturbation, before I felt a sign of life. I felt some libido coming back, and I would try and go for sex again and still would fail. But about 7 months, I was able to get hard to oral sex, which, interestingly enough, I watched a lot of oral-related porn, and I was having oral sex in real life as a 12 to 13-year-old, so I was wired deeply for oral sex, if you will. It took me 9 months of no porn, no masturbation before I was able to have successful sex. And Over the last 2.5 years, I'm still porn-free, haven't masturbated in close to 1,000 days now-ish. And I can honestly say that today, without porn in my life, I'm way more full of joy. I appreciate women, and I see sex in a totally different point of view. And I can honestly say that, and as a guy that's watched a lot of porn, it will never satisfy you. It'll only rob from you the one thing that it promises to give you, which is pleasure. The reality is, so many kids out there right now, I'm a counselor, I work with kids at the YMCA. So many kids out there right now today, right this very moment, I guarantee you are watching porn on their smartphones, on laptops, you name it. And they don't even know that it can have a potential negative impact on their life, like I did. I had no clue. And that's why I'm so thankful for conferences like this, just to get the word out that I'm not, my whole speech has nothing to do with is porn evil or is it bad or whatever. But the fact is, it has a potential negative impact that we need to discuss. And that's what I hope my story can let y'all know. And I hope that it will inspire and encourage other guys to talk about the reality of what porn's done to them. Daily, I get messages from guys who are suicidal. Literally, they go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, you're fine, it's all in your head, it's performance anxiety or whatever. And they're saying, no, it's not performance anxiety, I'm really jacked up. But there's no answers out there for them besides the fact, what Gary and Dr. Hilton and others like them are doing. They're not getting the answers that they need. They're going and getting bullcrap answers from an industry that just wants to give them a pill and say, go home and just relax, man. And no one's talking about it. So I'm thankful that we're talking about it. And I'm thankful for y'all coming to something like this and listening. And I just want to encourage everyone to spread the word. And hopefully we can save the world one boner at a time. Yeah, thank you for listening.
We're going to take a look at a clip that talks about Dr. Valerie Boone's experiment. And this is the first experiment of its kind that looked at brain scans and showed there is a measurable difference in frequent porn users. And it's similar to that of, cocaine addicts and other hard drugs. So we have learned that there's a high correlation between porn and some not so fun effects. And there are supporting surveys and research for this. Will people still argue that porn is harmless? Of course. Take a look at the studies yourself. I've created pornographyandmentalhealth.com to give a quick overview of what's happening here. Many people's natural reaction to this might be, I'm not addicted, it doesn't apply to me. I could stop watching if I wanted to. I say prove it to yourself. Go a month without it and see if you feel any different afterward. If you can't make it a month in the first place, you may want to consider that porn may be causing problems for you. And be honest with yourself. Lastly, I'd like to take 10 or 15 minutes here for questions. Are there any questions for Dr. Hilton, Marnie, Gary, Gabe, or myself?
Can porn have an effect on sexual preference? Absolutely. I'm not trying to say that there aren't people that have inherent sexual preferences, but can porn change or alter sexual preferences? Absolutely. No question. If we don't believe in neuroplasticity. And there are many who will say, yes, porn has changed their taste, preferences, attitudes.
Yeah, so the one way to know is to remove porn. And so we've written several articles about this. Over the last 6 years, we've monitored the forums. So many of the guys who go on there and say, man, I've been off porn for 60 days and I used to be hooked on transsexual porn. Now I can't even stand to look at it. So what we see is a lot of sexual taste revert. And since many of the young guys started early on porn, they developed what they thought was a fetish, whether it's a foot fetish or any type of fetish you can imagine, and they thought it was their true nature, and they didn't know it was their true nature until they removed porn, stopped fantasizing it, and then slowly their taste revert back to whatever they was, and they found out what their true fetishes were. Yeah.
I think there's a meme out there that says to kids, explore porn and you'll find out what your true sexuality is. But if this part of the brain is becoming number to pleasure and therefore you're escalating to more stimulating stuff, then that can't possibly be right.
Yeah, and that's tolerance. Tolerance is the need for greater and greater stimulation, and that's what occurs with addiction. And so as a porn user, you have two choices. You can watch longer, or you can get more of a bang. And how you get more of a bang is you move to shocking material, surprising material, and that's usually harder for stuff that causes anxiety. Because as I mentioned, anxiety actually increases sexual arousal. So the way the guys describe it is they'll start off with lesbian porn or heterosexual porn, and then years down the road, they're into porn, as Dave described, that he doesn't even want to talk about, because he needed a hit, because he was so numb to what he had already gone through. His brain was numb. He had less dopamine response to earlier porn.
I was speaking in Arizona once, and there was a U.S. congressman there. There was a guy there who was the head of the Obscenities prosecutor of child porn. Well, he called it the gateway drug. He said a lot of the guys being arrested for underage porn use at their computers, they would all tell him that they got there through adult porn. If you look at, right, Hustler has barely legal line where they're getting younger and younger. And what they'll do is get girls that are 18, without papers at least, but look almost prepubescent. And so that's definitely socializing and tracking the brain down with a neuroplastic learning process for younger and younger taste. Of course we change our taste. How many 2-year-olds like broccoli? There are several studies with other addictions that show recovery. For instance, there was a study with gastric banding where they looked at individuals that were morbidly obese with very high BMIs, body mass index, and they found that they had receptor depletion in their dopamine receptors. And in other words, no question of a physical, scannable measure of an addiction parameter. And when they had gastric banding and their body mass index returned to normal and they maintained that, then that receptor function improved. There's another study with methamphetamine where they found that within 2 years, areas of atrophy had actually enlarged again to more normal volume. So recovery has been scanned. Certainly, as you've seen, this is one of the first studies that Dr. Boone has done on pornography. We don't have a recovery study, certainly on pornography. But knowing what we know, a Camel is a cigarette, so is a Marlboro. I mean, we understand now that brain pleasure that goes awry is addiction. Addiction is basically disordered desire.
2 of the 60 internet brain studies actually followed users for several months, and both of them were looking at the front part of the brain, and they saw it return to normal. And the way to think about returning to normal is just looking at behavior. What occurs is you're no longer excited, but after months and months, you start getting excited by real women and able to achieve erection. Obviously, the brain has changed. And of course, many of the other behaviors I mentioned about guys losing social anxiety, confidence going up, motivation going up, obviously the brain has changed in order for those changes to occur.
I was just going to say that I experienced full recovery. I was probably addicted to porn since, about 13. So I have to remember before 13 years old, and yes, I was confident, calm. I was a kid with a lot of, high aspirations. I wanted to play in the NBA. Just a normal kid. But over the years, I did develop social anxiety, and I was laughing. I mentioned that I fit in every little point in that slide I think Gary had that had, social anxiety, depression, lack of focus, or brain fog. I experienced all that, and over my recovery of about, probably around 6 months, all that went away. And my confidence came back. I could think clearly. I could actually function out in the real world without freaking out. So, yeah.
So one thing I want to point out, if you go on yourbrainonporn.com, these are just tons of guys just sharing their story, and they're similar to what he's saying. There's a ton of people out there who've gone through this, so sure. Are there withdrawal symptoms?
Yes, there are, in my experience. The main ones that I see, because I read guys' stories all the time on these forums that Dave was talking about. The main one is anxiety goes up once you give up porn. You get real anxious. Like I said when I was sharing my story, I literally had panic attacks, and I was shaking. I started chewing on pins, and like a drug addict, that's, one that's fixed. So yeah, I mean, that's really all I need to say. I definitely experienced withdrawal, and it was mainly, mental. It was anxiety increase, insomnia, I couldn't sleep, and some muscle ache.
We've collected many of the withdrawal symptoms. We have those snippets. I think we have about 100 pages of all the guys' withdrawal symptoms, and many of them mimic drug withdrawal, which has been surprising to us. One of the most common ones, which doesn't occur with drugs, is they enter what's called a flat line. They actually lose their libido completely, even if they didn't have ED. Many of the guys who quit don't have erectile dysfunction, and they go for sometimes weeks to months with no sexual desire, and then they slowly come out of it. So that's unique to internet porn, as far as I can tell.
The physical part of that is you wonder, well, why does heroin give you these life-threatening withdrawal? And it's because has anyone ever had a leg problem taking a Medrol dose pack, or a steroid pack, or you've heard taking steroids for something the doctor prescribed? And basically what that is, it kind of decreases inflammation, and there's cortisol receptors in our brains. And it turns out that cortisol axis in our brain is intimately wired to our emotional axis. And when it's involved in the stress reaction in humans. And when we withdraw from something that has made us feel really, really good, suddenly, then our body goes into a stress reaction saying, wait, I don't have my candy, what I need. And it's really accentuated when you have a powerful drug like heroin, because you really have depletion of those opioid receptors and the dopamine receptors. So you get this rebound, gut-wrenching, and it's a response to stress is what it is. And so that's basically, this is a response to stress as well.
As a woman, I was a bit curious about this too. And what I did was go to NoFap, which you saw up in one of Gary's slides. There are now about 90,000 people recovering on Reddit NoFap. And I got the creator of NoFap to give me a list of all the women on the site. And there were hundreds. There were several hundred. And I went through all their usernames and all of their posts, and many hadn't posted anything, but many had. And Gary said, oh, you're going to find out those women are there just because their boyfriends are having porn problems, and they want some sympathy or advice. And 9 out of 10 of them were there for their own porn problems. So your instincts are exactly correct. And the only reason we didn't talk about them is because it's mostly been a male problem. It's only in the last few years that women are starting to use porn heavily. But they have the same brains and the same potential for addiction. So it applies to women just as well.
One other resource that I thought was helpful is a book called The Most Personal Addiction, and it deals with distinguishing loving sex versus addictive sex. It does a very good job about it. And the author, he wrote this specifically so you can try to help self-diagnose and self-heal. And you can get that at sexualcontrol.com. It's a PDF, it's free to everyone.
I was going to have a comment on your question about whether they're going to get taxed or not. Personally, from my experience, I don't care if they get taxed or not on porn in the future, 10, 20 years down the line. But it would be cool, like cigarettes, if there was a warning that came with porn that just simply said, once the studies come out, that warning, this can change your sexual taste and can give you a noodle or erectile dysfunction. That would be great. And I think that's actually a practical thing that we could do as a society, is just put a warning on it. People are going to watch porn if they want to watch porn, that's their thing. But as specifically, teenagers, young adults, and kids, they need to know that there's a potential, negative impact.
I want to thank all of you for coming. Thank you, speakers. You guys are awesome.